So, today I want to talk about something a little bit different. Today, I feel like taking a break from all of the politics and everything else and talk about a positive moment in history. This particular moment is one that, when I learned about it, changed a lot of my perspectives. It made me hopeful in a time when I was really cynical about life. It further entrenched me as an anarchist, a leftist, and a collectivist. And in learning it, I think that it spoke to me on a really deep personal and human level. This moment happened on December 25th of 1914. It's known as the Christmas Truce, in which 100,000 British and German soldiers stepped out of their trenches in the midst of World War I and celebrated Christmas together. And in order to understand the importance of this moment, I need to set the stage, historically, for what happened leading up to this point. The conflict of World War I was only a few months old. The Battle of the Marne had happened not too long ago, where Allied troops stopped German troops as they marched through France and Belgium. Around September 15th, both the Allies and the Germans had started digging trenches that were only 50 yards away from each other. You'd have these multi-trench systems, but the front trenches, where most of the front lines were only 50 yards from each other. The place in between was known as no man's land, and stepping out into it was certain death pretty much. You could get easily wounded from a sniper from one of the back road trenches, and you'd probably end up dying. Weather also proved to be a really big problem. As it rained and mud formed in the trenches, it could become slippery and dangerous. It could lead to very uncomfortable positions where soldiers were covered in mud for long periods of time and had trouble bathing. It could lead to strenuous situations where rodents would be roaming through the trenches. And it was just a very, very uncomfortable experience, to put it mildly. By November, both sides had realized their position, and both sides generally let the other go get food and gather resources without really harming each other. By December, the combination of the cold mud and the cold weather had made things even more difficult than they had been in the previous months. By December 1st also, there were cases of soldiers fraternizing, and there's one record of a German sergeant asking how the British were doing in their trenches. It was also common on the French section of the Allied trenches to see the French and Germans in December take 30-minute breaks in between conflicts where they'd declare a temporary truce to go collect the dead, so that the stench of the corpses didn't end up rotting everywhere. And I know this is supposed to be a positive video, but it's part of the reality. This was how horrible things had gotten. But on December 25th, these 100,000 troops between the Germans and the English rose out of their trenches. The Germans had begun singing Christmas carols. The English started joining them. The Germans lifted their head out of the trenches, knowing full well that they could be sniped and killed, and took a chance and stepped out of their trenches without weapons. The English did the same. The lower-ranked soldiers that were on the battlefield didn't offer any sort of commands to attack or strike. They let it happen. Many of the Germans knew English because they had worked in London before, and they often asked in these moments in between about life back home in London, about girlfriends, about the football games, little trivial things that just gave them a moment of life and reprieve from the war. They exchanged gifts of food, tobacco, alcohol, buttons, hats, and numerous other objects. There were cases of British soldiers giving German soldiers haircuts. They played soccer, football, in the middle of the no man's land, the same place that they had been just fighting in the day before. They also agreed to bury the dead that had been lost over the previous days and weeks. We know about this because the British letters were not censored at this time, and the information became public about a week later in newspapers. People wrote stories talking about the miracle they had just watched and witnessed, how one soldier recalled account of telling people back home that they were smoking German tobacco, not because they captured a German prisoner, but because the German had given it to him as a gift. The French and German governments were not as friendly to this fraternization, and they censored this behavior. News often did not come back to the French and German governments and were literally censored from being put out to the public because it would damage nationalistic tendencies. The truce in some sections of the front actually lasted all the way up till New Year's. In some spots, it ended on the day after Christmas. And generals and higher-ups in all of the armies really didn't take kindly to this action that was against, nationalism in the state. They tried to put in practices to prevent this from happening again, and they made strict rules about it. However, nobody was court-martialed for any of these treasonous acts of enjoying Christmas with people just like you. The generals, I think, recognized what that would do to morale and how devastating that would be. There were, of course, notable objectors, people who we recognize in history. Charles de Gaulle, for example, wrote on December 7th, when some of the fraternization had started, that he lamented the desire of French infantrymen to leave the enemy in peace. One other notable name, Victor Durable, wrote of the unfortunate consequences when men become familiar with their neighbors opposite. And interestingly enough, a young Adolf Hitler, who was a dispatch runner, who never made it to the frontline trenches, always in the back, in the third-line trenches, who never saw combat at this point, had this mindset that such a thing should not happen in wartime. And the reports say that he said, "Have you no German sense of honor?" The proto-fascist, ever ready to tell everybody about German honor when peace had formed, and he saw it as weakness. While the commanding officers did try to stop this fraternization over the coming years, it didn't always work. There were certain holidays where people still managed to have cheerful Christmas music or try to come out in Easter. The Germans actually tried the following Easter to pop out of the trench, but the English had to tell them, no, don't come out, because the higher-ups are going to have us kill you. And this was all signaled. That said, there became a system in certain parts of the trenches, which have been labeled in later years the live and let live system. Basically, local areas developed truces and agreements not to fire at each other when people were trying to do certain things along the front. This was negotiated by soldiers on the front against the wishes of their higher-ups, against the wishes of generals and political officials. They would agree not to attack each other during tea time, during meal times, during washing times, just as they had stopped attacking people who were gathering food in November on their own. In some places, these agreements became so strong that there were few casualties for an extended period of time. The point of this whole story is that in the midst of such a bloody conflict, a conflict that would only get worse in the coming months and years as really destructive methods were being employed, chemical warfare, and new technologies were being developed constantly to break the trench system. There was still a sense of humanity, of dignity, of well wishes against the wishes of nationalism and the state. There was a desire, absent of economy, to see your fellow human being well cared for. These were not good conditions to exist in. These were scary conditions, one where life and death was often a moment's notice away. Situations where mud made it disgusting and uncomfortable, where rodents were running rampant, and these people decided to make treaties, unofficial, against the rules of their government, to come together and decide to allow each other to shower, to bathe, to clean themselves, to eat, to drink tea, and to take little moments of reprieve. And with all of this, I'm not talking about a false peace where oppression exists and we just live in the status quo. I don't believe in any of that. But I am talking about a hopeful situation in which people who are equals can listen to each other, talk to each other, bond with each other, and come together without state or economic factors influencing things, and come in peace and try to create something better out of the situation that they're in. And I just quickly want to show some images. You have images of them playing football. German soldiers next to English soldiers. Taking photographs together. Sharing stories. And that's an example of what one of the trenches would have looked like. The Germans shared their Christmas trees, which they had just received on the front from their leader. This is a story of humanity and of peace and of taking little moments to find family, to find peace, to find one part of the human condition and family in a moment of disaster. With that said, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and the bell for notification. You can check out my Twitter and my Discord in the description below. With that said, my name is Anarchist Tara. I hope you find peace in this day and in this story and that it helps you along the way. And I really hope you enjoyed watching.